reading the scriptures, and we pick it up in Genesis 45, verse 3. And Joseph said to his brothers, I'm Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, please come near me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For God sent me before you to preserve life. Wow. Isn't that amazing? The overflow of his heart and what he shares reveals how Joseph had processed the 13 years of preparation for the suddenly. It reveals to me how Joseph had processed the 13 years of false accusation, of imprisonment, of being wrongfully sold into slavery, the abandonment and the rejection from his own family, from his own brothers, and the betrayal from his own family members. It reveals to me that he's moved beyond unforgiveness. He's moved beyond bitterness. He's moved beyond betrayal. He's moved beyond hurt. And he sees it from God's perspective. He sees it from God's eternal purpose. Joseph hadn't carried any of these things into his seat as the second in command. And he had a purity of heart. And I think this would have been crucial for him as he entered into his new role of second in command. Because you see, unforgiveness, bitterness, resentment, these things form a snare to us and hinder us walking in the fullness of what God has for us. They form a snare to trip us up in fulfilling the fullness of God's purposes. And so this is something that I'm wanting us to glean from Joseph. You see, the very people, sometimes the very people God wants to use us to minister to or to help are the very people who've wounded us. And in order for God to use us in his grand design, we need to walk free from unforgiveness, from bitterness and resentment. We have to walk free from this. We have to be in a place of freedom from bitterness. We have to move on. I love what Hebrews 12 verse 1 to 2 says, strong instruction. Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despised the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Therefore, let us lay aside every weight, every unforgiveness, every betrayal, every wounding, every hurt, and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and run with endurance the race set before us. You see, these weights, this sin, these things we hold on to become the very things which hinder us from running into the purposes that God has for us and from fulfilling the fullness of what he has for us. Hebrews 12 verse 14 to 15, it says, pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord, looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. And so as we go into this new season, as you go into a new season, I'm wanting to challenge you, and I'm wanting to challenge me. I'm wanting to challenge us. If there are people that have wronged us, we need to forgive. I remember last week I spoke about the nation, that word was a word for South Africa. It's a word for the nation. South Africa needs to learn how to position herself for her promised land. The same mentality that worked for the wilderness will not work in the promised land. And it's the same here. If there are people that have wronged us, if there are people we need to forgive, we need to release forgiveness, because these things hinder us from entering into the fullness of what there is in the promised land. South Africa, we have to learn to forgive and move on. We have to learn to release resentment to those who've wronged us. Otherwise, we cannot enter into everything that God has for us. And this doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter which family you're from. It doesn't matter which side of the railway tracks you grew up on. Unforgiveness, resentment, bitterness, it's It's a problem that everyone has to get over and get around and learn to deal with, If we're holding on to resentment regarding something that happened to us, we need to let it go as we step into a new season. If we've been falsely accused or wronged in some way and have held on to it, we got to release it. We got to release it. If there's someone that owes us something still after many, many years, and we know that they're probably never likely to pay it back, guess what? Just release it. Just release it and move on for your own health, for your own benefit. And, I just want to challenge us today. Maybe it's time to release somebody. Maybe it's time to release an institution. Maybe it's time to release a whole country. Maybe it's time to release an organization, a family member. Maybe it's time to release a boss. Maybe it's time to release a parent or a child or a spouse. But it's time to release. Maybe it's time to release a government or a leader, a church leader even. But we gotta step into forgiveness and be bigger than the things that have been done to us, because these things will only become hindrances and weights and eventually judgments against us as we enter into a new season. And I say judgments against us because when we judge, by the same measure we judge, we are judged. Because when we refuse to release forgiveness, we do not receive forgiveness ourselves from the Lord. And the Bible is clear on this. And so it's important that we move into the new season with purity of heart. If Joseph had bitterness and unforgiveness toward his brothers, maybe he wouldn't have given them food. Maybe he wouldn't have given them food to take to his father. And him feeding them was part of the purpose of God putting him in that position. And so it's really important as we go into this new season that we do so with purity of heart and with forgiveness.